Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the pirate radio broadcast of Jebediah Springsteen. I am broadcasting my voice through the vast distances of the heavens and straight into your ear holes. You are welcome. Today, dear children, men, women, and hyper-intelligent dogs whose owners left the radio on for you to listen to while home alone, I will describe to you my journey through time and space. Now, I know what you are thinking, and trust me, this isn't your average run-of-the-mill trip through time. I did not attempt to maintain my own existence by performing some rock song by a boy named Johnny. I did not run off to the future and pick flowers. No, dear listener, I spent my time traveling in useful matters, attempting to better the world. I think once we've reached the end of this broadcast, you will agree with me. Let us begin with how I managed this incredible feat. It was with the assistance of a dear friend and amazing artist. You all, of course, know the genius poet and all-around artist Ian Haddington, with his wonderfully deep and world-shaking single-word poems. I still weep every time I think of his poem, titled Ball. I could spend hours talking about that poem and never scratch the surface of its value as the greatest work of art in human history. But I am not going to insult the poem by trying. I will tell you of my travels instead. Well, dear audience, it turns out that Ian is a time traveler. He collects time machines, in fact. Well, not really. He actually possesses only a single time machine which he can morph into other time machines. It all began one morning while I was feeding my menagerie their special blend of meat, which is your average high-end animal feed mix of alien organs and mystic growth hormone. Anyway, while serving this food to my 2-story high lion Ricky, I heard the unmistakable sound of the time vortex being broken. I expected to see your typical future men asking me to save the day. I'm sure we've all been through this, so I'll not go into it. But instead, I turned to see Ian. He was dressed in blue boots and a vest, wearing a top hat and a sword, and he had on the most interesting pair of spectacles I've ever seen. You see, they were in the fashion of those wrapped behind the ears pairs of glasses, but instead of lenses, there were clocks with exposed gears ticking away. I asked him why he had come to see me, and he said that he wanted to reward me for my most recent stunning review of his poetry. He offered to take me on a trip through time and space. Immediately I jumped into his time machine. It was wooden and had an immaculate crystal, and a brass handle which he used to control it. He asked where I wanted to go first, and I told him that I wanted to journey to some place that was sad and tragic, where I could do some real good. A great kindness to those who suffered. Ian claimed to know exactly the place, and he pulled the lever back. Before my eyes, the entire universe, all of time and space, began to wind backwards. I saw Ricky shrink down to the size of a tractor, then back to a newborn pup, no bigger than a hybrid car. Then time began to go back at an even faster rate. The buildings around us began to be deconstructed. The grass field upon which it stood began to grow out of proportion, and then exploded with trees. But these too shrunk, and snow descended upon the land. There was white as far as the eye could see, and we began to slow to a stop. I became aware that my eyes were aching. Ian looked at me and explained that the drastic change of light from the rising and setting of the sun could cause horrible headaches, which is why most time travelers wear something that covers their eyes. He opened the glove box and handed me a sleek black glass visor. I put it to my eyes and it suddenly encased my head in a shiny black polished chrome helmet. I looked around inside this glorious device and could see holographic images alerting me about various objects and such in my immediate environment. There was also a small readout that said we were in the era of the last great ice age. I took off the helmet and asked Ian what we were doing here. He beckoned for me to follow him, and we soon walked over a small hill to find on the other side a tiny hairy elephant. It was then I realized that it was a woolly mammoth. The thing couldn't have been more than a month or two old. Ian looked at me and removed his hat. He said that this was the last of the woolly mammoths. Its parents had gone out to search for food and had just been murdered by our ancient ancestors. My blood began to rush with hatred at my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, and I clenched my fists in rage. But then I looked into this poor creature's eyes, and I saw fear. It was afraid that I was going to kill it, like my kin had done with its entire race. I let out a deep breath and slowly approached the poor creature. It tried feebly to run away, but I caught up with it and put my arms around it. I sat there in the ancient long-melted snow, crying with the child mammoth in my arms for several hours. And then I decided to do the only thing I knew that was right. I quickly grabbed the baby by the horns and used all my strength to lift it in the air, and then I began to twist. I heard the neck snap under its own weight, and I put the creature down. It is here that things got kind of awkward. As I stared at the animal on the ground, I began to hear it whimper. I had failed in my mercy killing. Quickly I ran to it and opened my mouth as wide as I could. I brought my teeth down upon its throat and began to torque my head about violently, ripping with my teeth and pulling with my neck. Blood filled my mouth instantly, and so did the cool, snow-covered hair. And it is at this point I realized why our ancestors had hunted these majestic creatures to extinction. They were delicious. The uncooked meat tasted better than the finest sushi, and the blood was almost like a barbecue sauce. This, mixed in with the cool chill of the frozen hair, made the entire thing into one exotic dessert. I gorged myself upon the child mammoth, and I regret nothing. In fact, at one point I looked up from my meal and saw myself also eating from a different section of the mammoth. I looked to Ian and asked if this was some kind of paradox occurring. He said that due to the vast size of the universe, that any casualty paradox we create really doesn't matter because of how inconsequential we are. He began to say he'd show me an example, but suddenly I heard a gunshot and saw his head get blown off. Enraged, I looked in the direction of the gunshot and saw Ian, another version of him at least, putting away a pistol. He looked to me and said, "See?" I then looked to the other version of myself as he ate the mammoth, and he looked up to me and asked if I was going to finish stripping a baby rib. I told myself no and handed the rib to me. I stood and told Ian that I wanted to travel more. He told me to put on my visor and then grab my shoulder while pressing a button on a pocket which he was wearing. Suddenly we materialized on a gigantic luxury ship. I looked up and down the main deck, and it seemed to become the horizon. I asked Ian where we were, and he told me we were aboard the Titanic. I asked why, and he said he'd never been. Ian told me to have fun while he went gambling. I explored the ship, walking up and down its decks. I saw countless numbers of lifeboats. I am quite the history buff, as my loyal listeners know, and so I did what anyone who cared about historical order would do. I quickly released a handful of empty lifeboats into the icy water. Ian said that people don't create paradoxes, but surely lifeboats could. As I descended to the lower decks, I saw that the ship was contradicting the history books even more. The lower-class people were living in the lap of luxury. They even had gigantic fireplaces of pure iron, which they were selfishly stuffing with far more coal than any fireplace could possibly need. I hit some of these poorly dressed socialites seriously, who wear sailor suits around above the head, and made quick work of throwing all their coal into one of the fireplaces on the right side of this huge decadent room. As I explored the ship more, I began seeing many tacky rubber rings that just had to go. I get it, the boat is called the Titanic. You don't have to tie a cheaply made sign to it every 20 feet. You know, I always thought that the Victorian era had more class than this. I also began to wonder what kind of captain this boat had. Why was he heading so headlong on the port side? Learn to drive, people! I ran into Ian and told him I wasn't really enjoying myself, and we got into a classy AMC DeLorean, which was covered in the most intricate pattern of buttons and wires. We drove down the deck of the ship and straight for the railings, passing many prudish passengers on the way. I shouted out the window that men were driving here and that they all needed to learn basic automobile safety. I then put on my visor, which morphed into the helmet, and once again we disappeared into the vortex of time and space. I saw clocks winding past, great historical moments passing us by, as meaningless as grains of sand through an hourglass. Sorry, that felt a bit trite. The moments passed like droplets of shit from a diarrhea-stricken rabbit. We landed in the heart of a city that my helmet told me was Berlin before the war. Ian told me that we were just making a quick food run. He told me that he knew of a German baker who crafted the greatest handmade strudel ever. He would know. I walked the streets of pre-war Berlin and found some local color. There was an alley in which local artists were selling their works. As you know, I consider myself a bit of an art critic, and decided to take a look. I also wanted a souvenir from this fantastic journey, one that would last for years, unlike the mammoth meat that I filled a plastic bag with. As I walked up and down the alley, I noted a fair amount of decent work. Some of it lacked vision, but other pieces were quite intricate. Then I came upon an utter eyesore. I almost couldn't stand to look at it. Boldly raising my voice, I cried out to the alley, asking who produced this painting. A small man with a ridiculously thin mustache raised his hand. I won't go into detail since what I said was fairly harsh, but I told him how horrid his artwork was and that he needed to find a new career instantly. I bought the painting next to his and left the alley, but not before spitting on his travesty of a piece. Ian and I met back up, and he asked me if I was ready to go, as he handed me some strudel. I told him I'd like to take a cigarette break first. Ian doesn't like smokers, and he told me that the only way he'd let me is if I first gave him my mammoth meat. I decided against this, and we prepared to travel. This time we both drank a fluid that transported us through the field of time and space. When we stopped, my helmet had no idea where we were, so I asked Ian. He was unsure as well. He told me to wait in the in that spot while he went to check. Looking out the nearest window, I could tell that we were on some kind of aerial vessel that was far too large to be an aeroplane. I puzzled for a moment, trying to figure it out myself. But then a thought dawned on me, and I quickly lit up a cigarette. I was only able to get a few drags in it before I heard Ian coming. I quickly exhaled the smoke in my lungs and tossed the cigarette in the nearest waste bin. Ian grabbed me by the arm, and we began to run. I asked him where we were going, but he told me there wasn't enough time to explain. Before I knew it, we were on the roof of this flying machine. It was large and gray. I followed Ian as he jumped off the top of this strange ship, and we began to fall through time, landing back in my menagerie. Ian looked at me and told me we'd just gotten off the Hindenburg with moments to spare. I breathed a sigh of relief. He thanked me for traveling with him. I told him it was so much fun, and that we honestly should do it again sometime. Ian tipped his hat, then began messing with some strange device that contained a miniature hourglass on the end of a necklace he wore before he disappeared. So, in conclusion, dear listeners, I showed a delicious animal kindness. I taught some tasteless rich people a lesson and preserved history. I put a failed artist on a good path, and I narrowly escaped a fiery doom. I hope you see the good I've done for all of mankind. You'll have to excuse me. I think I have a guest.